For the past 50 years, the National Association of Women and the Law has fought to advance women's rights in Canada. This is their story.
Whatever we gain in terms of rights, it's fragile. For women in the home, for women in families, for women and work, for the opportunities that women should have throughout their lives. It can disappear so very quickly. NAWL's importance is to make sure that that vigilance is there.
Without voices like the women of NAWL, we're definitely getting left in the dust, and we're not getting the full picture of what it is to be a woman in Canada.
On March 14, 1974, a group of visionary women, led by Shirley Greenberg, Lynn Kay, and Peggy Mason, pledged to create a national network focused on women and the law. Their goal? To rectify the inferior legal status of women enshrined in the patriarchal legal system.
NAWL, over the past 50 years, has accomplished a great deal in framing the law, in influencing the law, both in Parliament and in the courts.
NAWL's mandate is law reform, and women's voices should be heard when you're making a law.
Les droits des femmes doivent être protégés dans tous les aspects de la société. C'est vraiment important d'avancer cette perspective féministe intersectionnelle parce que souvent les personnes qui écrivent les projets de loi, les personnes qui votent les projets de loi n'ont pas nécessairement cette expertise.
Seeing the impact that the law could have on someone's life is really kind of what drove me rather than any one person. The whole feminist history of how we got from not even being considered people to being fully fledged members of society, and particularly as a queer woman, how that intersects with other struggles for equality against homophobia and transphobia.
In the early 1980s, the women of NAWL cemented their influence in law reform by successfully lobbying for changes to the proposed Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Women's constitutional equality is really important, and unless we have that, other bits of legislation and regulations won't matter as much, but we need to have that constitutional equality.
Whether people know it or not, a charter is a daily part of every Canadian's life.
NAWL was instrumental in the language around Section 15, which granted the equality rights to women.
The very first draft of the charter that we saw, it was disappointing to say the least. It was built on the language of the old Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights really didn't give a lot of substantive rights, and we knew that we wanted something that was much stronger than that, something that gave real equality. The government ultimately listened to that. We had a much stronger Section 15 as a result of the work that all of the women's groups, including NAWL, did.
NAWL was also a crucial voice in the fight to ensure a strong sex equality provision was included in the charter.
I was one person of very few in the room when we worked out the final wording of Section 28.
Section 28, what that says is that the rights of men and women have to be interpreted equally or have to be guaranteed equally to men and women. That's a big deal.
Early on, the women of NAWL were committed to supporting Indigenous women in their advocacy for rights.
Starting in 1984, female advocates started advocating for amendments to the Indian Act because at the time, when an Indigenous woman married a non-Indigenous man, she lost her Indian status, and vice versa. So when a non-Indigenous woman married an Indigenous man, she acquired Indigenous status. Isn't that odd? Subsequent changes have reduced the sexism in the Indian Act to a point where it's inclusive of thousands and thousands more people than it did when I was born.
In 1985, NAWL founded the Canadian Journal of Women and the Law. To this day, this journal publishes leading research examining the law from a feminist perspective.
Disons que mon plus grand projet, plus important, c'était la naissance de la Canadian Journal of Women and the Law. The purpose was to have academics, lawyers, authors prepare and think through pieces that often quite emphasize the intersectionality of women's rights and could stimulate the debate that then could be used in arguments in cases.
C'est essentiel d'avoir une voix féministe forte qui interpelle les gouvernements et la société civile sur l'importance de protéger, de défendre les droits des femmes.
Women still have a long way to go in terms of equality. So I think anything that moves us towards substantive equality, we just have to fight really hard and keep pushing till we see it done.
I think the problem with the legal landscape in Canada right now is there's the idea that, like, we've made it. That's very much not the case. Okay, we have, formal equality in the law, but that doesn't always translate into substantive equality.
Recognizing the devaluation of women's labor as a widespread societal problem, NAWL has sought to influence pay equity legislation and fight workplace discrimination.
Donc, à discrimination systémique contre les femmes en matière de salaire, il fallait adopter une solution systémique, c'est-à-dire une loi proactive. Alors, on a travaillé pour une loi proactive qui a finalement été adoptée par le gouvernement fédéral, qui ferait en sorte que les employeurs fédéraux seraient obligés de faire une analyse de leurs pratiques de rémunération, d'identifier les domaines où il y a discrimination salariale et de développer un plan d'action.
For 5 decades, NAWL has been unwavering in its advocacy for law reform initiatives aimed at addressing violence against women.
Un des enjeux principaux pour la NFD et pour le mouvement des femmes a été la réforme du droit sur le viol.
Jusqu'en 1983, c'était légal au Canada de violer sa femme. Le mouvement féministe, et y compris l'Association nationale Femmes et Droits, s'est extrêmement mobilisé dans les années 70-80 pour dénoncer les violences sexuelles. On n'a plus l'immunité maritale, on a une définition du consentement qui est explicite, affirmée.
In the 1990s, NAWL advocated for legislation aimed at protecting complainants in sexual assault trials from intrusive and discriminatory defense practices.
On a fait un gros lobby pour amender le code criminel pour faire en sorte qu'on ne pouvait pas invoquer impunément le passé sexuel d'une victime d'agression, qu'on ne pouvait pas sans raison aller chercher des informations dans les dossiers confidentiels.
There's still a lot of work to do in changing attitudes in society and in the justice system, as well as improving how the system works to support people who've experienced sexual violence.
Decade after decade, NAWL has been a strong voice for reproductive justice, fighting for the decriminalization of abortion and for greater access to sexual health services.
Dès sa création, l'Association Femmes et Droits a beaucoup travaillé pour la décriminalisation de l'avortement au Canada. À l'époque où j'étais à la NFD, on a beaucoup travaillé pour résister contre la ratification de la Convention interaméricaine des droits de l'homme, parce que l'article 4 de la Convention, on garantit le droit à la vie dès la conception. Donc, on a vu ça comme une menace aux droits reproductifs des femmes et on a beaucoup travaillé sur cet enjeu-là. Dans les années 90, les années 2000, l'enjeu principal pour la question de la justice reproductive était l'accès à des services d'avortement. À l'époque et encore aujourd'hui, l'accès aux services d'avortement et de contraception est un enjeu majeur.
On a tendance parfois à penser que les droits des femmes, c'est linéaire, que la société avance et qu'elle avance naturellement. Les choses n'avancent pas naturellement. La société progresse parce qu'il y a des activistes qui vraiment y mettent l'effort, qui luttent.
Recognizing that every issue needs to be viewed through an intersectional lens, NAWL continues to take an inclusive approach that addresses the unique challenges faced by women from diverse backgrounds.
Les lois au Canada affectent tout le monde, mais pas de la même façon. Et c'est seulement avec une analyse féministe intersectionnelle des lois et des projets de loi qu'on peut s'assurer que les droits de chacune soient respectés, qu'on peut s'assurer que les lois n'accentuent pas les discriminations, les violences, les violations des droits des femmes.
If you don't have an intersectional lens, you can't really make progressive law reform. People are not similarly situated, and it's that acknowledgement of difference and putting the most marginalized people at the center of your analysis and everything you do that ensures that you get equitable results.
Kimberly Crenshaw. She is the person who defined intersectionality in law as a Chinese woman who would have faced some discrimination. That really resonated with me.
Intersectionality is inescapable in my career because I'm Indigenous. So everything I do, I look at through the Indigenous lens.
The climate crisis is something that touches everyone across the world, but differently. Women and gender diverse people, particularly Indigenous, Black, and racialized women, have been at the forefront of the struggle all over the world for decades on end now. And they're also the ones who are the most impacted by the climate crisis.
As a woman of color, I'm very conscious that it can't just be a part of me, not just because I'm a woman or because I'm Black. Only when all of us enter can we say we have true equality.
Feminism, especially intersectional feminism, is so much about the whole picture. We are more than one group of women fighting for that group of women's rights. We're also fighting for trans women. We're fighting for non-binary people. We're fighting for two-spirited people. We're fighting for Indigenous people, people of color. We're fighting for disabled people. We're fighting for everyone to be safe, to be themselves, and to exist in a world and feel that they can be part of it. I think we got a brief glimpse of what Canadian society would look like without NAWL when we were defunded.
On a dû fermer nos portes, licencier tout le personnel. Heureusement, une équipe vraiment dévouée de militantes a continué à siéger au conseil d'administration, à continuer le travail de l'association Femmes et Droits.
NAWL matters in 2024 and beyond. There is much more to be accomplished.
NAWL's work into the future is going to continue to have impacts on Canadian women and the women who are coming to Canada as new Canadians every day.
I am proud to support the National Association of Women in the Law because it is a crucial aspect of advocacy for equality.
I am proud to support the National Association of Women in the Law
Because NAWL is actively trying to build a feminist utopia.
because I'm proud to support women.
I am proud to support the National Association of Women and the Law.
Because I get to work with a great group of women.
Because it is there for all women in Canada.
Nos législateurs ont besoin d'entendre une voix féministe forte qui défend les droits et l'égalité de toutes les femmes.
Les droits des femmes devraient jamais être une arrière-pensée.
Right now, I think what makes NAWL's work so important is that we are in a moment of tremendous backlash, not just for women's rights, but for the rights of other marginalized communities as well.
If we didn't have NAWL, Canadian society would be a lot less equitable. It's definitely not perfect, but we have a lot more rights as women because of NAWL's tireless advocacy for the last 50 years, and I'm really proud to be part of an association that's done so much positive work